Hey everyone! Today I am going to be talking about a topic which has been requested by several people, and it's going to be the first part in a series, and that is a beginner's guide to Dungeons and Dragons. So, if you've watched any of my channel, you know that I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and I've done a lot of videos on it in terms of roleplays and stuff, but I haven't really talked about like the fundamentals of how to play. And for this series, I'm not going to be talking about specific mechanics. Like, I'm not going to go through and talk about like this is how combat works and things like that. Those are kind of things that are specific to editions and different things like that. And I might talk about like tips for learning that, but read the rule books and ask for questions and stuff generally. But this is going to be talking about a lot of the stuff that isn't covered in the books themselves. They're loosely covered, but not a ton. And later I might, and by might I mean I probably will, after I'm done with this series, I'll have my beginner's guide to dungeon mastering. So, first and foremost, since this is a beginner's guide, what is Dungeons and Dragons? And also, I'll say Dungeons and Dragons in this video, but honestly, a lot of these tips can be referred to almost any pen and paper RPG, whether it be Dungeons and Dragons, or Pathfinder, or Exalted, or Shadowrun, or any number of pen and paper RPGs. So, but D&D itself is one of the oldest pen and paper RPGs. It is one of the most fun, influential games, I think, of all time. All time. It defined the RPG genre. It defined a lot of how we view fantasy in a modern context and whatnot. Like, it's probably second in terms of its influence on Western fantasy, only second to like Tolkien, as well as like the source material. But I mean, who cares about you, ancient people, and your mythology about fairies and elves and dwarves and whatnot? You're dead. I mean, I guess Gary Gygax is also dead, the creator of Dungeons and Dragons, but rest in peace. Where was I? Amazing put together, but nope, this is still a ramble. But yeah, so Dungeons and Dragons and RPGs in general is essentially, as opposed to video games, where like RPGs, where you will like essentially kind of like a lot of the mechanics are covered, like you're usually on a very set story and things like that, and it's usually single player and things like that, is essentially it takes a lot of the components that you might be more familiar with those and essentially makes you do them. It's honestly a do-it-yourself like RPG, like video game in a lot of ways in a modern context. Like, even though they came first, but it's better to explain things from a modern context. So essentially, you'll have a group of typically at least 4 players. You can do with less, you can do with more. Like 4 is usually considered to be like one of like the good group sizes. Like 4 to 6 is usually like the ideal group size in my opinion. And someone that's the dungeon master, the game master, the person who torments you and causes you to die, the person who's running the game. And they essentially are in charge of running the world, like all the non-player characters or NPCs, and running all the monsters and like writing like the story. although the amount of like writing the story, like, and how collaborative it varies by group and based on the system that you're running. Meanwhile, each of the players are usually playing one character, the player character or PC. So yeah. And typically for your first game, I would definitely recommend playing a player character, because DMing is a lot of work and it really benefits from like having a base familiarity with the setting and things like that. So, yeah. What else can I talk about? Alright, so first things first, if you want to start playing Dungeons and Dragons, is finding a group. This is kind of important because you really can't play D&D by yourself. I mean, you can do what I do and just like read the books all day and like seldom actually be able to get to game like I did for the first, like, I don't know, 10 years of me like playing D&D. I mean, I had games and stuff like family and things like that and like one shots of friends, but it wasn't like the same as it. But you need to find a group. So obviously, the best thing to do is get lucky and know someone who is running a group and like have a bunch of your friends in it. D&D is hard in the fact where it almost requires you to have someone like initiate you into the world of D&D. But I mean, there are other solutions. So one of the first ones is check if you're like involved with like a school or things like that. There's an organization that has chapters in a bunch of like major schools. What is it called? If I remember it, I will link it in the description. But they like, it's like the International Association of Tabletop Gamers or something like that. I will see if I can figure it out. But they, like a lot of schools, will have a chapter of it, and they can be a good resource for finding a group. My college never had one, so I wasn't really involved with them. But yeah, so that's an option. Another option is to go to a local game store. There's like there's a sponsored by Wizards of the Coast. There's a event usually on Wednesdays, I believe, that's like Dungeons and Dragons encounters, which can be a good way to learn the game if you want to learn just like the mechanics and stuff. The quality of these sessions varies from like store to store and who's running it. But it's like fun, like one-shot things, and they'll help you like especially like learn the mechanics and whatnot. And going to a few of those is definitely a good idea if you have to go to the next idea. But you can also sometimes find a group through those people if you get to know them, and they'll be like, "Hey, do you want to join my other group?" Or they can point you to someone else who is free. And sometimes it'll also be just like listings. Now, finally, if you still want to do an in-person game and none of those else works, honestly, you can start your own. This usually will involve you having to DM it, which isn't ideal for a first game, but isn't impossible, especially if you have solid like storytelling, if you have a good like acting base, if you've ever done improv and stuff. This is definitely a viable path. In terms for that, a few resources I recommend is going to like some of the D&D encounter sessions at a local game store, so you can like help learn the mechanics a bit more. In terms of dungeon mastering, listen to D&D podcasts. In terms of like actual sessions and like get the feel for a flow of a session. Now, one thing I will say is that while it is an amazing podcast, and I think it's just really good for like getting people involved with the game and excited about it, the Adventure Zone is not a good podcast for learning how to DM. It is very polished, and they cut a lot of the ebb and flow of how actual sessions pan out. There's a lot of the clarification on rules and confusion about that and math and things like that is cut out. A lot of that is cut out in favor of making a better play experience. Which, like, isn't a bad thing. And, like, sorry, I lost track. I had to do a cut because my phone buzzed. Remember to silence your phone before you record. But like, no, they just polish it to make it like good for listeners and things like that, which is fine, and like that's what they're trying to do. But podcasts, honestly, if I was to recommend any podcast, is Critical Hit is really good. It's an older one in terms of like the early episodes, and it's running 40, but the Dungeon Master Rodrigo does a good job of like talking about how he DMs, and like they don't cut out a lot in terms of like the explaining new players how to play. Honestly, one of the best things a dungeon master can have is patience, especially with newer players. So I'm not going to go more into like how to DM in general right now, but that's more of a topic for another day. But that's one option if you absolutely want to have an in-person game. And then finally, you can play an online game. I personally don't love online games just due to a few reasons. One, I am a very, expressive person where like I really get into character when I talk, like with my NPCs and stuff. And you lose a lot by not having a lot of the in-person like contact and like body language and whatnot. And I mean, that's just like a loss for me, and it's not the same. It's not the real Dungeons & Dragons experience if you're not in some basement for 5 hours eating pizza and in half-assed costumes for characters. Like, that is really the core D&D experience. It's not the D&D itself, it's the whole atmosphere. But that's not what I'm talking about. But online does have benefits, especially if you're a little bit more shy and you don't want to like put yourself out there in terms of like a lot of like acting and stuff. Roll20 is usually what people use for running online games. It's an online source, which essentially it's a virtual game board, and you can like move your characters around and roll dice and things like that. And they have built-in support for a variety of different RPGs and whatnot. So yeah, that's words that mean things. So that's an option. Like, you can look on their forums, and like you can look around like other D&D forums, or you have a group of internet friends and whatnot. So that's an option if you want to do, if you're looking for a group and you can't find one in real life. And it's also not a bad option if you want to do that to get some experience in the game before like trying to put a real life group together and DMing yourself. So that's kind of like the sad truth of D&D is that either you're running a group or you're getting lucky and actually finding and getting invited to one. Like, I personally prefer DMing, so that isn't an issue for me, but if you prefer being a player, that is kind of like one of those things where it's like, oh no, I better get lucky and find like a good group that is looking for players. Another thing that I should note is that most D&D groups fail, and that's just the truth of the game, where either a D&D group you're like all excited to play and everyone's made their characters and you never make it to the first session, or you get to a first session or a second session and then schedule conflicts come up. Once you make it to your third session, I find like the chances of like dropping off, like stopping in significantly, like drop off significantly. But I mean, the games still fizzle out, either after like 6 months or a year or so. Like, that's just kind of like the ebb and flow as people schedule and things like that. Like, the hardest part of D&D is scheduling. That quite frankly is the one thing that's hard. And getting everyone's like schedules together and things like that. Well, that's more of a topic for the DMing side of things. But the main thing is that if you find a group and it falls apart, don't be discouraged. it happens to honestly more groups than not. And I mean, usually there's a few people from that group who still want to play and can help put together a new one. So that's always an option. And another thing is that sometimes you'll lose a player, and that happens. Like, people try out the game and they find it isn't for them. You might try out the game and find it isn't for you, and that's okay. Just let them know that and don't suffer through it because you feel like you need to. So, yeah, no, just make sure you're comfortable with everything. And you know what? You know, also just like, it might be the DM, it might be just the style of game or the people you're playing with. Communication is one of the most important things in D&D. It's not knowledge of the rules. It's not being an amazing player or an actor or whatnot. It's communication. And most groups fail or are not good because there's not that communication happening between the players and the DM, and like the expectations of the game. And it's like, if like the DM is like going into things that like you're uncomfortable with, like, let them know that. Like, if like the game is like getting like very dark and gritty and like talking about like torture and things like that, like, let the DM know that and be open about that. And like, I know something I do at the beginning of like any of my games I do, any of the campaigns, is that like, I'm like, hey, you guys, how comfortable are you? Like, is there any like themes or topics you just don't want me to touch? Because I know like people have different like triggers and whatnot that like, and like other topics that just don't want to talk about. Like, I know I personally don't like to get into things of like in-depth torture and whatnot, and that's like just not something I'm into. And I just like let any group I'm in know that, because like, I prefer like, okay, like, I'm just like, there's a bird outside my window. It's like, I know that like, okay, light torture is fine. Like, you're talking about like, oh, I'm gonna like, I don't know, interrogate this person and like rough them up a bit. That's fine, but I don't want to hear about the exquisite like medieval torture devices that you're putting the person through. Like, yeah, you can have torture if you abstract it to, we're going to torture this person. Like, sure, why not? But I don't want to hear the graphic details, or like the other thing, like, I don't like to have like graphic descriptions of like surgeries and things like that. So, but like, just let your group know that, and if things come up, like, be willing to step up and be like, hey, can we veer away from that? Honestly, that's just good life advice with like people you're hanging out with for friends. But yeah. So what else? Make sure you have good tea. That's very necessary for D&D. Okay, not always, but what else? So, I mean, that's one good thing. In terms of like when you're going to sessions themselves, assuming in-person sessions, honestly, it's one of those things where it's like, it varies from group to group. But like, be punctual, don't show up late, communicate if you are going to be late, just normal group activity things. And like, help pitch in for food and whatnot, whether it be bringing your own thing or pitching for money. Like, don't be the person who mooches off all their stuff. Also, just be patient with the DM. DMing is a lot of work, and it's just one of those things where it's like, they probably have a lot going on, and if the DM tells you to like, hey, can we stop horsing around and get some like focus, be sure, just listen to them. Like, some groups are less focused than others, and you'll find like the kind of group that you like. Like, I'm like, some groups like are very casual, where it's like the game is secondary and it's much more about like hanging out and whatnot. And some groups are very focused. It's like, we are not going to talk about anything except the game. But honestly, my preference is like kind of like in the middle, where it's like, yeah, you can go off topic, but it's not like veer away for too long, and I'll direct people back in if we're talking off topic for too long, and that's okay. Honestly, it got to the point where we would actually just show up an hour before we said we were going to start D&D, because we knew we would talk for a while before we actually sat down and started playing. So that's something we had to sort out. So yeah. Trying to think what else I need to talk about. Yeah, that's pretty much most things of it that I have to talk about for this video. Next video, I'm going to be talking about making your character and things like that, in terms of things to think about and whatnot. If you would like to see any topics for me to cover specifically in the series, let me know, whether it be on the Discord or in the comments, or send a carrier pigeon my way. I know that's not how carrier pigeons work, but yeah. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention back when talking about groups, meeting, and scheduling and stuff, is that I would recommend, it's one of those things where it's I try to have groups we try to meet every week, with the expectation of that we won't make every week. Because I've had groups which we were meeting every week, and then they got frustrated that, oh, we haven't met in 2 weeks, how dare you, and they got angry and quit on me, because it's things happen and sometimes you can't meet up and things like that. And as long as you're trying to meet every week, that's fine. Groups are fine. I feel if you meet at least, if you have if you're trying to meet every week and you end up meeting once a month, it's still not bad. And that, it's as long as you're being consistent. After a month, I feel things start to fall apart, where people forget what is happening each session and things like that. So, but once again, it's all about communication and keeping track of things. And honestly, the group frequency and scheduling stuff is something I'll go more into during the DMing video, but that's the thing. But I think that's all I have to do for the kind of initial video on this. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something or not. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this series, and because it's been requested a lot, so yeah. Well, I will speak to you all later. And alright, I hope you all sleep well.